news today.
Hey everybody, this is your Right Geek, honorary man king, and leader of the Awkward Cough Squad, here with another episode of TV that shaped the Right Geek. And today, excuse me for the awkward coughing, today, the TV show I'm going to talk about is a TV show from the 90s called Early Edition. This is a show that aired from 1996 to 2000, on CBS, I believe. So I watched this towards the end of high school into college. This was not a show that got especially high ratings, but it did attract a dedicated cult fan base, of which I was a member of. And it was set in Chicago and actually filmed on location in Chicago. So all of the Chicago settings are in fact accurate, which was one of the special things about the show. And further, it was contemporary with the show Touched by an Angel, and kind of fit into that same sort of family-friendly block. So both of those shows were kind of in the same vein, and it was kind of I would say the late 90s was the heyday of family-friendly TV on CBS, at least in my lifetime. So the premise of Early Edition was basically this. The main character, Gary Hobson, wakes up one morning to find a random paper has been delivered on his doorstep with a cat. And throughout the day, he realizes that the paper he has is the paper dated for tomorrow, not today. So where this paper came from, nobody has any idea. Honestly, I always thought it came from God, because it seemed like a lot of the plots in the show seemed to have a Deus Ex Machina aspect to them. Like there was some sort of finger of God acting on his life and on the lives of the people that he helps in the show. So I always thought it came from God. The creators left that completely open, though, so if you were to go and watch the show, you could interpret it any way you like. You could say it comes from the Magic Tooth Fairy, or whatever. The lore that was developed through the show, though, did say that that people had been getting this magical future paper for a while, and that Gary himself was chosen when he was a child by the person who got the paper before him, whose name was Lucius Snow. In the show, Gary basically uses the paper to help people throughout the city. Though oftentimes the conflict of the plot is he is forced to make difficult choices or face his own fallibility as he's attempting to be, in some sense, a superhero, in the sense that he's been given this strange gift of precognition that allows him to know in advance when bad things are going to happen to people. By the way, the cat that comes with the paper, which was kind of the weird, quirky things about the show, I actually met that cat. Well, one of the cats. There were actually several cats who played the cat. But I actually met that cat back in 2001, and he was a pretty chill cat. And met his trainer, too, obviously, because if you have a cat on a show, you have to have a trainer. So, but that was fun. The cat didn't seem to mind being surrounded by a bunch of silly fans of the show. Like I said, he was pretty chill. there were basically three main characters on the show. You had Gary, of course, and Gary was a very sweet and generous guy, but also very human. And he wasn't incapable of getting grumpy when the strain of this responsibility that has been placed on him starts to get to be too much. And there were also times in the show where his going out and helping people and trying to pursue the stories that appear in his magical paper would end up with him, like, falling in a dumpster or something like that. It'll be some silly sort of slapstick thing that would just, oh, great, this is how my day is going to be today. I'm going to end up in these stupid situations that I didn't ask for and I didn't plan for. Then we had Marissa, who was Gary's best friend, and basically his good angel, in the sense that she was always the one encouraging him to do the moral thing. And the interesting thing about her is today she might be seen as sort of a representation trifecta, because she was black, she was female, and she was also blind. But back in the 90s, I wasn't really thinking about that. All I was thinking was, she's a good character, which is really how it should be even today. If you're going to put in someone who represents a particular group, make sure that they are actually a solid three-dimensional character. And Marissa was, because back in the late 90s, we didn't stress about that. On the other side, we had Chuck Fishman, who was Gary's other best friend. And he was kind of the bad angel, because Chuck was always trying to encourage him to use the paper to get rich, to basically see what was going on in the stock market and sort of do a little insider trading thing, because, you know what the stocks are going to look like tomorrow, so trade based on that. Or he would try to encourage him to go get the winning lottery number or something like that. Chuck was always trying to think of get-rich-quick schemes, because that was his thing. But he was also, like, despite the fact that he had that little greedy streak in him, he was also basically good-hearted and basically was a good person deep down. Unfortunately, this character leaves at the end of season 2, and I think the show did lose a little something after that, because having the way the show was originally set up in the first 2 seasons was a very good sort of like a Freudian sort of setup, where you had Gary is the ego, and then Marissa was the super ego who was telling him this is what was socially acceptable to do, this is what was the right and moral thing to do. And then you had Chuck, who was basically the id, telling him, ooh, these are all the tempting things you should do with this power that you have. And once Chuck left, basically that whole setup kind of disappeared, and the show lost a little something after that. Although, even season 3 and season 4 still had some solid material in it. There were also a couple of recurring characters. There were a couple of cops, for example, who always found it strange that whenever something untoward was going on, Gary would be there, and then they would get kind of suspicious, like, why, whenever some crime is going down, or there's a fire or something like that, Gary's always there? What's that about? And then there were also a couple of love interests too, but honestly, I didn't take a whole lot of interest in any of the love interests, because I always shipped Gary and Marissa, but that was just me. I know that there were other fans of Early Edition who agreed with that, who disagreed with that perspective, and that's okay. Everyone can do their own thing. As you can probably tell by the theme song that I played in the beginning, the tone of this show, like I said, it was family friendly, and the tone of it was basically light. Actually, a very good adjective to describe it would be Capra-esque. There are, in fact, many episodes that are basically early editions version of Jimmy Stewart movies. So you had like there was one episode where Gary goes out to rescue a kid who almost gets run over at an intersection that doesn't have a stoplight. And when the parent runs up and says, "Oh, thank God you saved my kid," she says, this intersection is so dangerous, there really should be a light there. So what he does is he decides that he's going to go into politics temporarily, and he ends up, as a councilman. So it's kind of like early editions version of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And there's actually a lot of send-offs to old Hollywood movies of all types, because they also had one where he broke his leg, so there was also like a Rear Window homage in one of the episodes too. So there's a lot of humor. Like I said, as I was talking about, sometimes the situations that Gary would be forced into would be kind of silly, and like I said, he would end up face first in a dumpster, just out of circumstances because of the things he has to do, and then you would see him, I can't believe, I also love, one of the things I loved about the show, it was such a minor detail, but I adored it immensely, is that every time you had a scene where he was waking up in the morning just as the paper was hitting his doorstep, he actually looked like he was waking up out of bed. Like, he didn't look like, typically in a lot of Hollywood products, when people get up out of bed, they still look perfectly coiffed and they have like their makeup and everything. No, not Gary. He had his hair all over his head, and he looked all, "Oh, I can't believe it's 6 o'clock already and I have to get up and do this paper thing." So again, that was such a small detail, but it was so nice because it just really humanized the character, and I really loved it and thought it was funny. But because it was mainly a light show and kind of a Capra-esque sort of show, most of the time, whatever situations Gary would find himself in, they would generally work out well, with a few notable exceptions. There were some standout episodes where Gary would fail, and then he would have to deal with the consequences of his failure. But most of the time, he was able to work out a way to fix whatever the paper was saying was a problem, and sometimes it would happen. Like, one of the things I noticed about the show is a lot of times there would be a situation where the paper would report some little small kind of individual problem that somebody was happening, and then that would be competing with this huge disaster, like a little girl is going to die versus a plane crash, and then it's like, well, what do I do? Do I save the little girl, or do I go and I stop the plane crash? And a lot of times the solution was that you go and you save the girl, because that's what was actually within Gary's capability to do. He wasn't actually a god. There were some things that Gary just could not stop. So, like, a lot of times the situations were set up so that it would play to his strengths as someone who was more able to help people on the small scale instead of on the large scale. So, like, he would go and he would save the girl, and shock of shock, the girl's father would be the pilot of the plane, So that's kind of what makes me think like the paper came from God, because of the way that things would sort of work out in a divine providence kind of way. There was another good episode too, where he gets thrown back in time to the time of the Chicago fire, and he's sitting there in 19th century Chicago, thinking, how the hell am I going to stop the Chicago fire? That is completely beyond my capabilities. But the point was not that he was supposed to stop the fire. The point was he was supposed to stop this little boy who was going to be the ancestor of someone who was going to be important in the future. So that the emphasis in the show was on not like stopping the big disasters, but on helping people on a small scale, which was kind of nice. And it sort of emphasized that each individual life is being looked out for in some way. It kind of, without making it explicit, it kind of embodied the biblical idea that not a sparrow falls that God doesn't notice. So that aspect of the show I really like too. So those of you who are listening, did any of you watch the show in the late 90s? And what did you think of it? I'd like to hear from you because I did watch it and I really adored it. I thought it was lovely and very, very nice. It was basically one of the nicest shows on TV, and so funny and so adorable. And just let me know if you've seen the show before. Let me know what you think about it, and I'll talk to you again on Thursday.